That's when my kids were little. And I decided to trot it out again with you. Now, some of this is just going to be what you already know. It's going to be reinforcing what you've already learned. Some of it's going to be new. But what I entitled it was, Did Jesus Really Rise? So this is from me. This isn't from your curriculum. It fits in with the curriculum, but it's from me. So I want to start. So the question where I'm asking in this is, can we be sure Jesus rose from the dead? But first, I want to give you a story from my freshman religion class. You've heard about my freshman religion class before several times. That is the professor who said Jesus never claimed to be God. And two of the things that he said when we were talking about the resurrection, one was that it wasn't a physical resurrection, it was a spiritual resurrection. And then he put it this way: if you had been at the tomb that day, you wouldn't have been able to take a picture of Jesus coming out of the tomb. Hang on to that. We'll come back to that. It won't be till tomorrow, but we'll come back to that. So did Jesus really rise? The story is told in all four Gospels. I want to give you an aside, because people say, yeah, but some say two women went to the tomb, some say John and Peter went to the tomb, some say, and there's discrepancies within those four accounts. But here's why those discrepancies don't bother historians. It first of all, it proves that there was no collusion among the writers. Years ago, when I was at Miller North, there was a teacher who had 4 boys come into her first hour class late, and they said, we had a flat tire. Now, she knew these boys well, so she said, that's fine. We had a quiz today, so you need to stay after class and take the quiz. And so she did, and she said, take out a sheet of paper and put it in 4 corners of the room and said, which time? And they hadn't colluded with each other, and so they had different answers, right? So she knew it was false. In this case, we know that they didn't collude because they gave different answers in some ancillary things. Nobody says, the disciples rushed the tomb and stole the body. But those small differences don't make, that doesn't bother historians. Yes?
So is it almost better for it to have small imperfections than to be too perfect?
Yes, if it's too perfect. It's kind of like how you figure out plagiarism, right? These are not your words. I know these are not your words. And so there's no collusion. They are all independent accounts, and that's important, because independent accounts are more likely to be true than accounts that are where people are I can't say that word, colluding with one another. And secondly, they are minor differences. They are secondary differences. Like I said, nobody says that they rushed the tomb and grabbed Jesus' body and ran. It's saying things like, was there one angel, or was there 2 angels? Did the women get there first? Did one of the men get there first? Was John and Peter the first, or were the women? They're minor differences, and they can all be rectified with one another. So that's not a problem for historians. The primary facts are the same, and so we read about this story in all 4 Gospels. Thank you. And so we're going to read part of Matthew. Now at the feast, the governor, the feast of Passover, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd anyone prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" There we go. We'll just right here. Oh, one more. Now, the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two of you do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea, so this is after the crucifixion, named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered that it be given to him, and Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut out of rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, which is probably Jesus' mother, were there sitting opposite the tomb. So they saw where he was buried. The next day, that is after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said, Jesus, while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore, order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people, 'He is risen from the dead.' And the last fraud will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it as secure as you can." So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. Now, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said, that means they fainted, but the angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen. He is, as he said, come see the place where he lay." While they were going, behold, some of the guard in the city went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, "Tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while he was asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. So we're going to table that for a little bit. So the story is in all four Gospels. And this was Matthew's account. So did Jesus really rise? And that's a good question. I think it's probably the most consequential question we could ever ask. And many people have undertaken to discredit the resurrection and have become believers in the process of doing that. C.S. Lewis was one of them. He wanted to make sure that everybody knew that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, and he ended up becoming a Christian. So did Josh McDowell. You probably don't know that name, but you might remember the name Sean McDowell. We've seen several of his videos over the last couple of years, Sean McDowell is the son of Josh McDowell. Lee Strobel, you know from watching the video last year, was an ardent atheist until he undertook an exhaustive, as a reporter, investigation into the resurrection of Jesus. And then another man named Frank Morrison, he wrote a book called Who Rolled Away the Stone, also was an atheist until he dug into the resurrection. So why do people try or have tried to discredit the resurrection of Jesus Christ? It's physically impossible. People don't just rise from the dead every day. But it also creates a problem if it's true. Because if it's true, we'll have to deal with the question, who is this guy, right, that rose from the dead? Because ordinary mortals don't do that. Don't resurrect from the dead. Although they might be resurrected from the sleep. And Pilate said in the middle of this, what shall I do then with Jesus who is called Christ? I think that is the most consequential question anyone can ever ask. What am I going to do with Jesus if he really is risen from the dead? That demands a response from me. So can it be proven? Can the resurrection of Jesus Christ be proven? And people often say that they don't believe in the resurrection because it can't be scientifically proven. And as you well know from last year, they're right. It can't be scientific, right? So anybody remember the term that we use for evidence, historical evidence? Yes? Nope. The term for that kind of, I'll give you one of the words, that kind of science. Forensic science. Do you remember this now? Is this forensic science? Yeah. And so things are proven all the time through forensic science. Here's the thing: scientific, empirical science is only on things that are observable and repeatable. When I was a freshman in high school, I had to take chemistry. The worst semester. As a freshman, yeah, I was required for my PE major for some strange reason because all of this such.
Oh, in college.
Yeah, college. And and it was rough. It was really, really rough because I didn't take chemistry in high school, and I had all of Algebra 2 for that, so it was really bad. So I get into my first lab, and it tells me to set up this thing. I'm setting up this thing that's holding this beaker that has cleared water, and I'm putting this thing called a titrator up that's going to take another clear fluid, and I'm supposed to drop it one drop at a time, right? And so the first question was, what happened? And I very proudly wrote, it turned pink. And the second question was, why? Because it wanted to. I had no idea why it turned pink. I didn't understand that, right? That's forensic science. Or not forensic, that's empirical science. We don't use, for figuring out things in the past, we don't use empirical science. We can't use empirical science. We use forensic science. This is the basis of our legal system. You find out who was at fault in a car crash by taking that evidence from the scene and recreating what happened, right? And we find the truth that way, not with empirical science, with forensic science. Yes.
I would like to point out that maybe the chemicals turned pink because that's who they really felt that they were, and that was their perception.
That's how they identified this.
It identified as pink.
That has to be true. Thank you. You make me feel much better because I got the right answer. It just wanted to.
You filter that you think it's a chemical reaction that.
So let's just say that you go home today and you say to one of your parents, Mrs. gave the greatest lecture ever on the resurrection. It was great. And let's just say it's your mom, because I can pick on your mom, says, prove it. Prove that she did that. And so you're going to come into me tomorrow, right? And you're going to say, can I have your lecture notes so that can I take a picture of your plan book? And you're going to take evidence back to your unreasonable mother who who says you had to prove that. That's forensic evidence, right? That's how we prove things in history. And it's the basis of our court, as I said. So historical proof is also based on what is probable, not what is possible. There are a lot of things that are possible. Like Stonehenge was built by aliens. That's possible. But it's not probable. Especially since we haven't met any aliens. Some strange people, I will admit. But not the aliens.
Because they built the pyramids instead.
Some person on YouTube is going to roast me for saying there are no aliens, but I can take it.
Yeah, and that's why the aliens stay away.
That's why the aliens stay away, because of me.
Approved by the ADR.
So let's talk about what historians do. So they use historians to find out what happened in the past. To find out what happened in the past, historians use eyewitness first-hand accounts called source documents, and those are the best kinds of documents, things that were written at the time of the event. So what historical proof do we have for the resurrection? How does it stack up to other historical the truth of other historical events? Well, first of all, we have 4 source documents written by people very early after the resurrection. So written not long after the resurrection. Some people date the earliest gospel as AD 37. I would probably go with AD 40 something, maybe 42, maybe 45. But here's the thing. Even if it's 45, it's at worst 13 years ago. Do you remember 13 years ago?
No.
Yes, a little bit.
Well, when you're 62, you're going to remember more than 13 years ago. I can remember 50 years ago.
15 years.
I can remember some things from close to 60 years ago. I remember very well being 12 years old. A friend of mine gave me a football jersey that had a 12 on it. So yes, I was a boyfriend. Yeah, not a boyfriend. I was a tomboy even then. And I remember my teacher. I remember my classmates. So. So this isn't that long afterward, after the time of the resurrection. And every one of the Gospels was written by either an eyewitness. Matthew was a disciple. John was a disciple. Or, in the case of Mark and Luke, informed by eyewitnesses. We're told by an early church father that Mark wrote down faithfully Peter's recollections. And if you read it, it reads like Peter wrote it. And immediately we got the boat, and immediately we went here, and immediately Jesus was on the shore, and immediately it's very action-packed. Right? So we have these 4 source documents that were either written by eyewitnesses or informed by eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses told them the stories. The gospel accounts are eyewitness accounts. They are not legend. Anyone who tells you that has an agenda that requires them to believe that. So we have these 4 source documents. We also have an early church creed in 1 Corinthians 15, and this is the creed that they would recite in church. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day in accordance to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter, then appeared to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and then to all the apostles. Listen, what Paul is saying here especially when he says he appeared to 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. He says, if you don't believe me that Jesus rose from the dead, go ask them. They saw him risen. And they saw him die, and they saw him rise from the dead. So he's daring them to do that. So what part of this was the creed that the church would recite in their services? So he said, it starts here. Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time. And this is the earliest statement of belief of the church is that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And it was possibly taught to Paul by Peter or James. And so it would have been even earlier than this. So to say that we can't scientifically prove the resurrection doesn't weaken the argument for the resurrection. It just puts the resurrection in the realm of reality with all other historical events. Can we prove historically, using forensic as evidence, the resurrection? Well, we have 4 eyewitness accounts plus an early creed, and that is probably more source documents than there are for most of your history books. And we have written history on far less than that. In fact, a high court judge in England said as much. He said this: to me, the evidence is conclusive, and over again on the high court, I have secured the verdict, the verdict of guilty or not guilty, on evidence not nearly so compelling as we have for the resurrection. As a lawyer, I accept the gospel evidence unreservedly as the testimony of truthful men to facts that they were able to substantiate. They were good witnesses. They were believable witnesses. And yet, throughout history, people have tried to discredit the resurrection by floating alternative theories that don't hold water. So we're going to play historian a little bit and talk about some of these theories. Some you've heard before, some you haven't. But first, let me tell you what's not in dispute, that everybody agrees on. Everyone agrees that something happened to Jesus' body because it isn't buried anywhere now, and it hasn't been since 3 days after the crucifixion. So not even Christ's opponents denied that his body was missing. Nobody ever said it's still in the tomb. The question has always been, what happened to the body? So the first one is that he wasn't really dead. I call that the Princess Bride theory. He was just mostly dead. He wasn't all dead. And many eyewitnesses saw his crucifixion, and none of them claimed this. But beyond, and that's both friend and foe, those who were for him and those who were against him, none of them said that he just swooned on the cross. He didn't die. But we have medical evidence that he was dead. Jesus was already in critical condition before he even got to the cross. The medical term is hypovolemic shock. And listen to this list of symptoms of hypovolemic shock. Low blood volume. It would have caused erratic heartbeat, fainting, collapse, thirst. And it would also have caused the collection of fluid around his heart and lungs. That's what it tells us in the Bible. That's what happened to him. The blood and water flowed out. He fainted. He collapsed. And all of that is seen in the account in the Bible. But even if he had survived the crucifixion, he could not have survived the thrust of the spear into his heart and lungs. And we have historical evidence of this because the Romans declared him dead. We just read that, so I'll read it again. It was the preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath. So as the evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that Jesus was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that that was so, he gave the body to Joseph. These were trained killers. This was their job, 24/7, to kill people on a cross. They knew when people were dead. They didn't make a mistake. Jesus was truly dead, not just mostly dead. The second one is this. Joseph never buried him. So Joseph bought the tomb, but he didn't put Jesus in the tomb. Now, first of all, we have eyewitnesses of that burial, right? Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, probably Jesus' mother, were there. And that is told to us in 3 gospel accounts. And they later go back to the tomb. Why would they go back to the tomb trying to anoint Jesus' body if they didn't think Jesus' body was in there? He saw them. They saw the men bury Jesus in that tomb. So clearly they expected Jesus to be in the tomb. And if the religious leaders were so concerned about his body being stolen, surely they checked to make sure that the body was there. But most of all, why would Joseph do it? Why would he fake a burial? Not even the disciples closest to Jesus expected a resurrection. How would Joseph know how to fake one if his own disciples didn't think he would, didn't understand that he was to rise? The next one is his disciples stole the body. I love this one. I call this one the weekend at Bernie's theory. Now, you probably, okay, so one person understands that. Okay, so Weekend at Bernie's was like an 80s, I think, movie. Don't watch it, and certainly don't put my name with it. I know it's on YouTube. If you watch it, I've told you don't watch it, okay? But here's the storyline is these 2 young bucks that get hired on by this millionaire executive, and he invites them to his beach house for the weekend. They get there, and Bernie is his name. He's dead, and they think that their vacation has been ruined. So they decide, no, we don't have to do that. We can just dress him up and take him everywhere we go, and so. Then we can still do all the fun things we want. We just need to take the corpse. So they dress him up and like they put him on water skis with it. They take the boat around and his body is bouncing on the water, and they just go everywhere with Bernie. They just take Bernie wherever they go. Well, so they took Jesus and he just walked through Jerusalem and nobody noticed that he was dead. That doesn't make sense, does it? Fishermen getting past armed guards. The Jews said, make it as secure as you know how. That was probably pretty secure. And the penalty for falling asleep was death, so that wasn't going to happen. But the picture in my brain is them carrying the body through the streets of Jerusalem and nobody noticed that they're carrying a corpse. And then I think this is even more important though. After Jesus died, these guys were wimps. They were cowering, fearing for their lives. If they killed him, they'll kill us. They'll find out who his disciples are and won't want us spreading it. And so they were hiding. Do you really think that they'd risk being killed at this point? They will eventually, but not at this point. They didn't even know to steal the body, right? We read that in John 29. They didn't understand Jesus' teaching that he would rise. He tried to tell them. It just didn't make sense. They were clueless in a sense. Their complete surprise at his resurrection proves that. So even if they could have pulled it off, they didn't even know they should try and fake a resurrection. They were clueless. Now I'm gonna give you an example of that with one last story and then we'll be done. My mother, in the closing years of her life, by the way, this isn't a tearjerker, so don't worry. She was diagnosed with macular degeneration. And macular degeneration is where your macula is getting bad and you can't see very well. And the bad thing about that, obviously, is because she eventually had to stop driving and had to have a reader for her. There was this big thing. But the good thing was I got to spend a lot of time because I became her chauffeur. And I remember her first trip to the doctor when she was diagnosed with macular degeneration. And she told me and my sister and I, the name of the doctor, and my sister got angry and said, I wish I could go to that doctor. I went to that doctor years ago, and you didn't tell me he was good looking. And I just went in sweats and a t-shirt. If I would have known he was young and single and good looking, I would have just dressed up. And so we're thinking we're going to this doctor, and he's really good looking. And so it's like, okay, let's see this guy that's really good looking, right? And I'm looking down. She's sitting in the chair, and I'm looking down, and I see people, and I'm like, I don't think that's the guy. Because he was about as tall as me, about, I don't know, a little taller than me. He was bald up here, but he had a gray ponytail in the back. And he had these big glasses on, and he was not, he was not what we were expecting. So, but my mom, ever the optimist, I know, like when he walks in the room and he starts looking at her eyes and things, and all she's saying is, "Okay, doctor, yes, oh, I understand, yes, that's great, yes, that's just wonderful." And I know what's going on in her head. What's going on in her head is, if you were 20 years younger and he had his hair, would he be handsome? I don't know. Maybe he'd be handsome. No, maybe. I think maybe he would be handsome. And I'm like, no, that's not the guy. It turns out it was his brother. He was clueless to the whole thing. And that was just very much who my mother was. So the disciples were like that. They didn't know to fake a resurrection. And so they didn't fake a resurrection. So we'll stop there for now, and we'll pick up here tomorrow, and we'll finish it tomorrow.